Hello again. This module is going to be over radiation incidence and response. This is a longer module, so just bear with me. I will try to move quickly and not bore you to death by reading off every word on each side. With that being said, let's get started. As most of you know, in Hamilton County we have several sources of ionizing radiation. For example, we have medical and veterinary clinics that use radiation for x-rays, irradiators, and radiotherapy. We also have many research facilities such as universities and industrial companies that possess radioactive material. One source of radiation people forget about is transportation. In Hamilton County, there are several major transportation systems that run through the city and the county, such as highways and railways. At any time, radioactive material could be transported through our county. If one of these transportation vehicles is wrecked, we could have a radiation emergency on our hands. And as most of you know, we have two nuclear facilities in our area, Sequoia, which is here in Hamilton County, and Watts Bar, which is down in Bradley County. So one of these threats here in Hamilton County is the Sequoia nuclear plant. All of Hamilton County falls within the 50-mile ingestion pathway, and a majority of the county is in the 10-mile radius. Much of the county is also within the 50-mile radius of the Watts Bar plant. The likelihood of an incident happening at either one of these plants is extremely low, but as always, we are prepared to protect our citizens' lives and property. As a host county, we are required to maintain nuclear incident response training and preparedness, which is what this training is part of. In the 10-mile EPZ, or Emergency Planning Zone, it's divided up into 23 sectors. Within those 10 miles, there are over 93,000 people, 23 schools, 22 daycares, 15 assisted living facilities, and over 150 individuals with functional needs. Within the 50-mile radius, there is over 1 million people. When there is an event at the nuclear plant, TVA will notify TMAC and then notify local department leads, such as the Director of Hamilton County Office of Emergency Management. At this time, the Sequoia or Watts Bar plan will become activated. Each department lead will activate their department as outlined in the plan. Each plant has 4 levels of emergency classification. There's notification of an unusual event, alert, site area emergency, and general emergency. At each classification level, your agency's response will be different. You can see your agency's responsibilities at each level in the Hamilton County Multi-Jurisdictional Radiological Emergency Response Plan. So there are several ways that the public can be notified if there is an event at the nuclear plant. These notification systems can be activated through the state SEOC or County 911. These systems include fixed siren system, which are the sirens placed around the 10-mile EPZ, the emergency alert system, tone alert radios, and emergency responders going out and informing people of the situation. You may be wondering at this point what your responsibilities may be if there is an event at the nuclear plant. Each agency's specific roles and responsibilities are laid out in our multi-jurisdictional radiological emergency response plan, but all emergency workers are responsible for protecting the public and the emergency responders, as well as assisting with rescue, contamination control, keeping yourself safe, and directing media inquiries to a designated public information officer. If there is a nuclear event at Sequoia, these are going to be our top priorities for protecting the public. We will make sure that people are sheltering in place or evacuating the vulnerable populations, such as children and those with functional needs. The shelter in place or evacuation of general public, providing security for evacuated areas and routes, shelters, and staging and recovery sites. We will also prioritize the monitoring and decontamination of emergency workers and the public, as well as provide radioactive protective drugs such as potassium iodide, or KI. During a radiological emergency, you may hear 2 different terms. There's going to be shelter in place and lockdown. A shelter in place is directed upon release or immediate release of radiation and is a preferred method for protecting the general public. When a shelter in place is ordered, people will be asked to stay inside and seal off all ventilation systems, windows, and doors. A lockdown is similar, but is normally directed to help protect vulnerable populations such as schools, medical facilities, and assisted living centers. So here are some things that you should keep in mind when an evacuation is in place. Remember that most people will evacuate prior to an official notice. Word is going to spread quickly if something starts happening at that plant. So many people will go ahead and start evacuating before an official order is sent out. This will also happen at the schools. Parents will begin picking up their children at the schools prior to an order being sent out. A high percentage of people will also stay with friends or family and will not need to stay at a shelter. Some individuals with functional needs or without transportation will require evacuation assistance. Also, some residents will resist the evacuation, and unlike a natural disaster such as like a hurricane, people can choose to stay in their homes and ignore the order if a natural disaster is in place. But for a radiological event, people must leave their homes since they pose a risk not only to themselves but others. If they actually become contaminated, we can force them to leave. So moving on to shelters, there are 11 shelters within 4 counties designated for a Sequoia emergency. As I mentioned before, there will only be a small portion of people who will actually stay at a shelter. We have planned for sheltering up to 20% of our population. The shelters will be managed by the American Red Cross, with the Hamilton County Health Department conducting the public monitoring and decontamination. Another kind of site that we will set up during an evacuation is a shelter information point. We currently have 8 pre-designated sites around the county where people can go to obtain additional information on evacuation routes and shelter locations. Also at these sites, first responders can go to any one of them and get monitored for any contamination that they may have come across. As I said before, we have 11 shelters spread out between 4 different counties. All shelters will either be in Hamilton, Meigs, Ray, or Sequatchie County. Once the event is over and people in the evacuated areas can return home as long as the conditions permit. These areas must be checked and decontaminated, which could take a significant amount of time. When the initial response is over, recovery efforts will begin once the problem at the plant has been resolved and the evacuated areas are deemed safe for habitation. These efforts will be initiated by the state governor at the recommendation of the director of TEMA, the Commissioner of Environmental and Conservation, and TVA officials. And that brings us to the conclusion of this module. If you have any questions over this or any of the other modules, please contact me at the number on the screen.